Today, Triumph unveiled the final prototype of their first electric motorcycle project, the TE-1, and not only is it a great looking bike, but the performance specs look pretty impressive too. The only bad news, I guess, is that you won't actually be able to buy one. And so I went to their headquarters to see it firsthand and also speak to their head of product, Steve Sargent, to find out why. But before we get started, a massive thanks to Beeline Moto for sponsoring the channel. If you like your tech, but perhaps you own an older bike, then it's a super easy way to add navigation to your cockpit. It's small, neat, and easily fits on any bike, and they've got an awesome app with loads of great route planning features. I use mine pretty much all the time, so I can thoroughly recommend it. There are links down in the description where you can find out more. And once again, a massive thanks to Beeline for their support. Now, the first thing I wanted to know from Steve was whether Triumph's customers are actually ready to adopt electric motorcycles yet.
So I think you always get a mix. When you go out and do market research on electric vehicles, you always get, your die-hard ICE vehicle fans who say, I couldn't do without the noise, I need an exhaust sound, I want to be able to change gears. I just don't get electric vehicles. I don't want to be sat in a cafe for 20 minutes waiting for the thing to charge up. So you're always going to get a percentage of people for whom it's harder to get them to consider an electric vehicle. But I think there is a lot of acceptance in the market that this is a technology that's coming. It's a technology that's developing all the time, and it's getting a lot closer now to what people think, yeah, actually, I could live with that. In terms of what we're speaking to people about, in terms of their expectations, they're expecting something close to what they currently have today. So they're expecting a range not too far away from what they have today. They're expecting charging times that are convenient enough that they don't feel they're going to get stranded.
So have Triumph achieved specs that are comparable with what you can currently get from a petrol-powered bike? Well, let's start with the performance figures, and they claim that the TE-1 will make 175 horsepower peak and 109 Nm of peak torque. So when you set them against their most sporty and powerful bike, the Speed Triple, they actually look pretty good. Now, weight is still a little bit behind owing to the heft of the battery, so we're looking at 220 kilograms total compared to the 198 kilograms wet of the Speed Triple RS. Still, Triumph have achieved something there that's a little better than comparable bikes on the electric market, so things are heading in the right direction. Ultimately, these are just numbers on a spec sheet though, so I was keen to find out how it actually feels on the road compared to a Speed Triple.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. We actually had an opportunity to ride this bike at Bruntingthorpe just a couple of weeks ago. So I think in total there's probably been only about a dozen of us within the business who've had an opportunity to ride it. Right. And it is absolutely awesome. I mean, the acceleration is unbelievable. Speaking to one of the guys who does a lot of test riding for us, and he's an ex-racer, he's raced in British Superbike, and he actually turned around to us and said, this is one of the only bikes that he's actually felt scared of the performance. And that's just that pure acceleration. I mean, between 50 and 100, you just can't believe how fast this thing goes.
Clearly it's going to be a quick bike, but what about the all-important charging times? Have Triumph made any gains here?
So we've got a 50 kilowatt DC charging system on the bike. So it's something that we've developed quite closely with Williams. So we've got 0 to 80% charge in 20 minutes, which is better than anything that's currently on the market today. That's really building on the knowledge that guys like Williams have built up over the years. Obviously, they've had big experience in Formula E and developing high-density, high-performance batteries. So working with them in terms of their knowledge and developing that onto this bike, we have come up with something that's quite impressive, I think.
So this is only a prototype, not designed to be charged at home or anything, but still, 20 minutes up to 80% is pretty impressive. It is worth adding, though, that you'd hypothetically need to find the right charging point that can deliver that 50 kilowatts if you were on a production equivalent of this bike. Now, they say a full charge would give you 100 miles of real-world riding at a variety of speeds, which is decent enough, I guess, for a naked bike. It's not meant to be a long-distance tourer. And if those 50 kilowatt chargers became more common, then the range does become a lot easier to swallow. The other thing that puts me off electrics a little bit is the styling. Whereas petrol-powered bikes tend to be quite big-shouldered and aggressive looking because of the fuel tank, a lot of the mass of electrics is down low where the battery's located. They just don't tend to have that aggressive stance that I think a sporty motorcycle should have. But all that said, the TE-1, I think they've nailed it. It's almost as good looking as a Speed Triple, which obviously it's inherited a lot of its styling cues from.
I think generally, as a brand, we try to keep some continuity in terms of styling across the different families. Quite clearly, this bike sits in the performance naked category where our street and speed triples sit. What we wanted to do is to keep that family lineage in the styling of the bike. What we see is we see a lot of people come into electric vehicles and particularly electric two-wheelers, and because they have an opportunity, they try to create something that is quite different from what is already in the market. But for us, we just think that's a potential barrier to converting people onto electric vehicles. So if they see something that is more familiar to them, something that they're used to riding, but it's just got a different powertrain, we believe you'll get a higher conversion rate of people onto electric vehicles.
Now, at the start of the video, Steve also mentioned the sound, or lack thereof, as a negative factor when it comes to existing bikers considering the shift over to electric. So have Triumph intentionally tried to tune the sound in order to replicate some sort of soundtrack while you're riding?
So it's mostly a product of the practical side. So we've got a motor that spins to 17,500 RPM. To get that to drive the rear wheel, you've got to go through 2 stages of reduction, basically, to bring that down to a rear wheel speed. The first stage of that reduction is a pair of helical gears that are permanently meshed together. As those gears rotate, you get that turbine whine sound. And actually, everybody that has heard the bike has said, that's actually a fantastic sound. It really gives you that kind of impression of speed and performance. So in some ways, it's come as a result of a mechanical need, but actually what people experience from it is quite impressive.
So you've done nothing to dampen it, I guess.
We've definitely done nothing to dampen it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we were going to develop that further, there are other things that we could do. But for now, actually, the sound that you get from this bike, and I think people will hear it on some of the videos, is quite impressive in its own right.
The other thing is the lack of gears and missing that satisfaction of nailing your downshifts, for example. Could there be any benefit to fitting a traditional gearbox to an electric bike, especially if it helps to bring customers over?
There's actually disadvantages to it. So, if you put a conventional gearbox on here, you would have all sorts of friction losses as the power goes through that gearbox before it drives the rear wheel. So you're actually, by putting a more conventional gearbox on, you're actually losing performance. And you don't need it, is the answer. I think the more you ride electric vehicles, the more you don't miss that side of it. I actually quite like, when I'm riding this bike, coming into a corner, the only thing I've got to think about is get my braking point right, get my turning point right, and then get back on the throttle when you're ready to do it. So you can really focus on the things that help you get around a corner quickly. So for me, I think it's just a question of getting used to it.
So it sounds like Triumph have a pretty deep understanding of what customers are looking for, and the TE-1 ticks a lot of those boxes. So that begs the question, if they've done a significant amount of the hard work in getting this prototype together, why not just sell it now?
One of the challenges that you have with electric vehicles, obviously, is they're still quite expensive. We've seen, obviously with some of the other products in the market, that they haven't gained huge traction in terms of sales volumes. It's a huge amount of investment to go from developing something that is a prototype vehicle that we've used for our learning and understanding to actually getting this into a showroom as something that you can buy. And quite simply, the cost of things like batteries, for example, and also the motors, mean that this would have to come in at a significantly higher price than an existing Speed Triple, for example. And I think until the technology develops to a level where those two things are a little bit closer, it's probably not going to be this vehicle that you see first.
That is understandable. If punters are a little unsure about adopting electrics, then an uncompetitive price is hardly going to help. But that leads me to think, well, what was the point in building the TE-1 right now?
So, this really was a vehicle for us to develop our understanding and our engineering excellence in e-vehicles. There's a lot of things to learn about developing this kind of powertrain compared to what we're used to. Obviously, we've got a really strong history now of developing ICE, twin-cylinder, three-cylinder, petrol-powered engines. Developing an EV vehicle for the first time, there's so many things to learn around, the cooling system, how you manage the battery, how you manage the performance of the battery and the motor together. So, that's given us a huge basis of knowledge.
Knowledge that they can hopefully use to build a production electric Triumph motorcycle when they think the market is ready and the costs are viable. But when is that? Are there timelines? Is that something you're actively working on, the successor as opposed to this?
Yeah, so we already have electric vehicles that are now on the drawing board that we've got teams working on. So we're not going to announce today exactly when they come to market, but just to rest assured that the things that we have learned coming out of this project are already being applied in our new model program.
Personally, I can't wait to see what they come up with. And yes, the TE-1 looks cool and the performance side of things is definitely exciting. But recently, we're seeing bikes like the Maven RM1 or the Regent Classic and Scrambler, which put a bit of a retro spin on city-friendly electrics. And so I'd love to see what an electric Bonneville could look like. As always, a massive thanks to Steve for his time. I really enjoyed finding out more about both the TE-1 and Triumph's approach in the coming years. I'd love to know what you think of the prototype, and I'd also love to know what you think you'd pay for it. Keeping in mind that a Speed Triple RS currently costs 15.5 grand, let me know down in the comments below. And if you're new here and you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.